Welcome to the Real Deals Salon Series. This is a series we started about 2 years ago during COVID. We thought it would be good to take a part of our office and turn it into an event space because despite what Greg says, office is down. So we thought this was a great use of it, and I want to thank our sponsor, Thermador and Gaggenau, for sponsoring this event and the entire series. And, the purpose of these salons is to have intimate conversations with people who are really experts in the field, in whatever category they're in. And today is, we've done several of these now, and today I have to say we have a very special guest. He's been called by the AIA, the American Institute of Architecture, as the most innovative architect in the world. And we're proud to have him here in New York, which is great. He's a New York architect. He's designed the skinniest tower in the world. Can somebody name it? Steinway Tower. He's designed the largest modular building in the world. Can somebody name it? Barclay Tower. Look, you have a fan, Greg. You have a fan. And obviously, he's designed the American Copper Building. He's designed commercial, residential, museums, institutions, schools, the whole lot. And we're going to talk to him about the business of architecture, about design, and obviously technology, because that's one of the things that really allowed him to, take his firm from 30 years ago, from a five-person team to the most innovative architectural firm in the world. And that's not coming from me, that's coming from the AIA, and they're really stingy with those kind of comments. So it's a real thing. Greg, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Amir.
So I want to start with something very basic. I want to talk about sort of the trajectory of your firm, of Shop, yourself, and how your philosophies have changed since you started and to today.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here tonight, and thank you everyone for coming out on a hot, sticky night. And the rain held out, and it's great. It's funny. I read one of the first interviews I gave about 25 years ago, and actually, a lot of the things that we said 25 years ago are still the sort of cultural touchstones of how we practice today. And it was always about taking advantage. Like trying to find the spot in your profession where people were not paying attention to it. So, we started thinking about 3D printing and CNC technologies and pushing the limits and the territories that architects would practice in beyond what our good friends at the AIA tell us to do. So for those of you who are architects in the room, the number one rule in the AIA book is do not get involved in means and methods of construction. So the first thing that we did as a young architecture practice was get involved in the means and methods of production. And it wasn't about profit. It wasn't about it wasn't just about control. It was about using every skill we had to keep the quality of the design as high as possible. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about that on day one. And, I'm fortunate that we still get to think about it all the time.
Yeah. Well, I've been watching a lot of his interviews preparing for this salon. So I'm just going to repeat a lot of the things you said. But one of the things you said was that, when you guys came on the scene in 1996, you guys sat in a room together. It was a group of 5 of you guys. And you said that, how are we going to win big projects from the established guys, right? And you look at architecture very differently, and I think that's what allowed you to grow your firm the way you have. And one of the things that you guys focused on was technology. Yes. And this was 1996. People were not doing fabrications. They had different sort of workflows, and Shop came up with these sort of concepts and designs to set yourself apart. And you started with small projects like the Porterhouse, right? And then from there you use that to do the Barclay Center. You want to talk about that?
So yes, you're right. So we were this little young firm. We had all these great ideas, and I think the exact quote I may have given was, "Nobody's giving us a Frank Gehry budget." So how do we figure out as a young firm how to extract the most architecture and create the most value for our clients through other means and methods. So this is what I was saying before about getting involved in means and methods. And it was, we realized like, okay, we're on the sort of cusp of the generation that really understood technology in a new way. Like the guys a generation or two ahead of us were not going to understand technology the way that we would. So we should go all in on technology as a way to push that forward. And so, you know,
And in 1996, I mean, technology was pretty nascent. I mean,
Super
the
nascent.
internet had just come out, you know.
That's right.
Right. So,
and we're doing, you know, we actually had a scoreboard at shop, and it said, I mean, this is nothing against my friends at SOM, but it was, we had a 3D printer scoreboard, and it said shop 1 SOM 0 in 1996, because we knew we were at the front, and we wanted to keep reminding ourselves that every single dollar we reinvested in the technology, because it was the way that we could push ourselves forward in a way we couldn't compete against the generation ahead of us for the budgets, but if we could figure out technology, it would give us a way in with clients, and it worked. So the Porterhouse, I'm sorry, to get back to your question, was
the Porterhouse is the building in the meatpacking district for people who are not familiar.
on the corner of 15th and 9th, which was, you know, a different neighborhood than it is today. And, you know, we found the building, which was a 1905 warehouse building. We did an air rights transfer from the neighbors. We decided that the only way we were going to be able to push this technology and be able to use the things that we were thinking about, none of our clients would really trust us with it. So we said, well, that I guess we have to become our own client. And so that's what we did. So we put the deal together, and then we went to one of our clients and asked if they would partner with us. And the fascinating thing was that, you know, here I was a young professor at Columbia. We were doing all of this kind of radical design. And, you know, suddenly I was also a developer, and a lot of people came to me, a lot of my colleagues came to me, and they were like, oh my God, you know, like, this is so ridiculous, but this is 30 years ago. They were like, you know, you're going to the dark side. Like, why would you do that? You know? And I was like, what are you talking about? And I will give my dean at Columbia all the credit, Bernard Tschumi, because I went to Bernard and I said, is this going to like really hurt my reputation? And he said, that's such bullshit. He said, Adolf Loos was a developer. He went through the history, like, you know, back to the Renaissance of all the architects that took on that side of work. And so by taking an equity position in the building, we then went to our partners and said, hey, there's this new technology that we could build a facade with, and I think we could cut the price in half. Right. And they said, go for it, because they knew that we had more at risk than they did at the end of the day. And so we actually ended up basically being the design build contractor, and actually made the facade of that building. And that was 4,000 uniquely shaped pieces of zinc that were designed with no shop drawings. It went straight from the 3D model to the plasma cutters to computerized break formations. And we made it ourselves. And then we hired a roofing contractor to weather seal the building. We hired a carpenter to hang the panels, and it went together like a puzzle piece. So that's the biggest building that we built at 50,000 feet. And then 6 years later, Forest City comes to us because they've got to reposition the Frank Gehry Arena at Atlantic, what was called Atlantic Yards at the time. And they said, you've got to rebuild this building, and we've got to reposition the whole project. And I mean, this is $1 billion project, and the biggest thing we had done is the Porterhouse. Right. And so they were like, why do you think you could do this? And we showed them the drawings, and we showed them how we solved the problem. And they looked at us and they said, you actually made the facade yourselves and took on all that risk. You invented new ways of drawing. You invented all this. You tried all these new things for the first time. And they were like, okay, first of all, you're nuts. And second of all, the project is yours. And that was the big jump. And it was because we took risks that nobody tells you to take.
So that the Porterhouse really opened up the door.
100%.
Yeah. And, you know, you guys do something unique in that, you said that you get tired of negotiating with developers on design choices. So you become a partner in the project so that they know that you have skin in the game and that you're not doing something because it's fanciful, but you're doing it because you think it's going to work.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we work with many different developers, and we love developers, and we love speaking their language, and we love talking about design as something that adds value, not something that costs a lot of money to put us on the front cover of a magazine. That's boring to me. But if you talk about the value creation, if you talk about the intelligence with which you use materials, if you talk about how you're doing that for sustainability reasons, for branding reasons, for beauty reasons, for entitlement reasons, for all this stuff, like actually, and you get that narrative down, and your client sees you as a partner, not a vendor, you're able to do much better work.
Right.
And unfortunately, in architecture school, they don't teach you this. And they literally teach you the opposite. And it's been a huge frustration of mine and why I taught for 22 years or something like that. And it's a really important thing because we're not in opposition to each other. When we align, we do great work.
Well, you mentioned that there's two schools of architecture, right? There's the corporate architect that comes in, does the master plan, and builds everything out. And then there's the theoretical guys who do amazing designs that never get built. And they just file for bids, and that's basically their business. But you guys manage to do some stuff that's very theoretical. I mean, the American Copper Building, that's the building that's two buildings going up on the East River. That's one of them is bent, has a dent in it. And it looks like it should be a rendering. It looks like it shouldn't be something that's built. And of course, the Steinway Tower and some of the other stuff that you guys did. What allowed you to sort of be able to prove that you could marry two?
I mean, it was from day one, the idea of the office was to be a thinker and a maker. And when, the founders of Shop actually were we were all in other professions before we went to architecture. And when we got to architecture, we were kind of like, wait, is this how you solve problems? Like, this is crazy. And the fact that it was certainly more divided 30 years ago that you were a thinker or a maker. And we said, well, you have to be both. You have to be both at all times. And I would like to say that some of the things we've done, as well as other firms out there, have proven that you can do both. And I think the profession has moved, and the profession has changed a little bit in the last 3 decades. But it was incredibly important to us never to make an image of a building and hand it off to a contractor and say, figure that out. That you have to come with the answer. You have to think through the whole process before you even dare to push the limits of design. And if you can break it down to the components, which are, where is the material sourced? How is it delivered? How is it fabricated? How is it assembled? How is it delivered? All of these things. At the same time of having an incredible narrative about the importance of the building and the importance of these design moves and why they matter, if you can get those two moving in the same direction, you get to build really good buildings.
Right. And, you say that the architectural schools in general, they do a disservice for the students. One, they pump out way too many architects. And two, they don't sort of teach the students about the business of architecture. And, something that you said was that, you get these architects who come, to want to work at Shop, and you ask them what a performer is, and they can't explain a performer. And how useful would it be for an architect to understand what a performa is and how it applies to the project?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very antiquated 20th century notion of the artist, the art and the commercial, I even hate using those two words, have to be separated, right? And, it's crazy, but I mean, I can't tell you how many times if you talk about that stuff, they're like, oh, well, that's not for architecture school. And I'm like, no, this is exactly where you need to be talking about it. Because if you've got to be conversant. It would be like saying you're a diplomat and you refuse, and you've got to negotiate a peace treaty and you refuse to learn the language of your opposition or the people you're trying to solve a problem for. And so, the fact that that would even be thought, and I think it's changing finally, but it's finally changing a little bit. But like the fact that that would even be an idea.
But the thinking is that the idea of commercial would impact the purity of the design.
Which is ridiculous. In fact, I think if you're smart about the commercial, you drive the purity of the design.
Right.
It's the opposite of what everybody says.
You do have a reputation for being a great businessman too, right? So it's very weird. It's very odd to have that because I remember, Richard Meyer famously said that architects are failed artists, and and artists are obviously not business people. And you've managed to make a great business, which a lot of architects, no matter how talented they are, they're not able to scale it. And you've managed to not only scale it, but make it an incredible business as well.
Well, we try. After the last 4 years, nothing feels like a good business, but that's okay. And, we go through cycles. And, SHOP was an acronym for the original founding partners, but we took our names off of it in the first year. And it was for two reasons. One, we wanted the practice to live beyond us because we knew there'd be a day when we would step down, and we didn't want, I interned for Frank Gehry, so I'm like, and adore him, and he's a great guy. But like the first line on his website for 40 years was, "Every building is designed personally by Frank Gehry." And I was like, that works until you're not there anymore. And we really felt it was important that we wanted to build a practice that lived beyond us. So in year 2, we took our names off it. But then SHOP worked well because that was the idea. It was a workshop. It was a think tank. It was an open framework for anyone who was young and creative and interested and had an idea could come to us and say, like, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. And to be honest, we've been an incubator for probably 10 businesses. And to be honest, probably 8 of them have failed. And that's okay, because we learned incredible things from businesses that did not make it.
Right.
And so you say I'm a good businessman. I don't know. I've got like only a 20% success rate, but I've learned at every single stage, and we're never afraid of failure. We're afraid of being formulaic. We're afraid of not pushing it, and we're afraid of not being good partners with our clients.
One funny thing that you mentioned was that when you go to a meeting and somebody says, well, we can't do that. And you say, why can't you do it? And he's like, well, we've never done it that way before. And you say you immediately cross that person off the list.
Yes, that nothing makes my head explode more than that, because that's not the way we do it. As soon as I hear that's not the way we do it, I know that this person is irrelevant to talk to. Right. And the reason that we have such a great relationship with Michael Stern and JDS is that every time I bring up something about that's hard, and I look at him and I go, we don't really know how to do this because it's really hard and no one's done it before. And Michael goes, I don't care, let's figure it out.
Cool.
And that's why he is an absolute incredible client and friend and partner, and why I have the utmost respect for him, and that's why those buildings are good.
He does tend to design and develop some of the most interesting, exciting buildings.
He's amazing, and he's a risk taker, and this stuff is hard. And I'll never forget, I was working for Stephen Ross very early in my career, and we had done Porterhouse, and I had told him that I had developed, and Stephen looked at me and he said, "You're not a developer." And I said, "I know, I'm an architect." I said, "But we've developed one building, we'd like to do more." And he said, you're not a developer until you've gone bankrupt twice. And I think about that every single day. And I've come close about 6 times, but that's okay. And that gave me a lot of confidence to fail, right? Because they've gone bankrupt, and look at what they've built right across the street. So, it's amazing to think about how you change the territories in which you work and how you adapt whatever is next. And it may work and it may not work, but by staying curious and staying driven and not just doing things the way you do them is, to me, the secret of making great places.
Folks, for the folks in the back, you're welcome to use these couches. Normally we turn them. I don't know why we didn't do it this time. So you're more than welcome to come and get a front row seat for the same
Because
price.
it's very comfortable to walk down the middle of the aisle. Good, I like this guy. George.
Yes. Dude, let's do a fashion show. Great purse. Nice work. Excellent. All right, great. So, Greg, you also, obviously you guys are famous for using new materials, but you also resurrect old materials, right? Like terracotta wasn't really used for high rises since the 1970s, but you guys have brought it back, and it's a marketing feature for the developer. They love highlighting the fact that their high rise has terracotta in it.
Yeah, I mean, materials have always been a driver of shop. Like we don't have, and Richard has been a mentor and a friend and everything, but what a Richard Meyer building is going to look like, right? You know what a Frank Gehry building is probably going to look like. So there's one way of talking about being an architect, which is that you have a signature style, and shop sometimes is a little bit harder to understand because it's a signature process. And part of that process is talking about materiality. And why do we talk about materiality? For two reasons. One, it's a way to connect to the context of where you're building, which I think is incredibly important. That, and we're now building in 22 countries and, doing a lot of different things. And while we started in New York and a lot of our buildings feel like they have a New York DNA, when I go around the world, I want to connect to the DNA of that city. So therefore, it can't be a shop signature style. It has to be a process. And so materiality becomes a really important part of that process, because you look at the materials that are being used and have been used sometimes for decades, sometimes for centuries, wherever you are, and how do you take those and reposition them into something new? And that's super important. Two, I also think that really caring about materials is an incredibly sustainable strategy, right? Like the key thing is to pick materials that age and patina gracefully over decades, so that the building doesn't have to be reskinned or fixed or altered or whatever all the time. And that is sustainability. Like photovoltaics are fantastic, right? Like all of these technologies are great. But the most sustainable thing you can do is build density near mass transit, build great open space near it, and build buildings of high quality and high materials that people do not have to renovate every 20 years. And if you can do those three things, you really make a sustainable world. And so the materiality becomes an incredibly important part and an inspirational driver to the design of the buildings.
Speaking of materials, you guys are building the tallest timber building in the world right now, the Altacian. But are you using the technology from Sidewalk Labs that Google started to do that, or is that completely you using a different method?
It's a different method. So the Atlassian building is a super interesting building. So Atlassian is a tech company from Australia, and Atlassian was a fully remote company before the pandemic. So they were ahead of the curve on all this stuff, but they realized that it was really important to have a kind of fantastic headquarters. But the challenge was that they wanted to really lower the embodied carbon of the building from day one. So the way that we did it was we knew the building needed to be about 45 stories tall to fit their program. And you can't build a 45-story tall timber building. It doesn't work. So what we did was we built a super floor that was thick, like 3 feet thick or 4 feet thick, actually. And it
Thick
was,
with timber?
No. With concrete and steel, and then was filled with soil to become a park. And then in that park, we built a 5-story mass timber building. And then we built another, we call them the super floors, a super floor with concrete and steel and a park, and built a 5-story mass timber building. And then built another one and a 5-story mass timber building. And we went up 45 stories tall. and it's under construction right now. And I really do believe it's going to be one of the most remarkable buildings in the world when it's done. So it's a hybrid mass timber, steel and concrete building, but it still will be the tallest one in the world. But the driver of the building was, we said that every single person working in any desk in that building can be in a park in 60 seconds, even if you work on the 45th floor of the building. And Atlassian loved that for bringing their workers back to the office.
You didn't have to use timber for that. Why did you choose to?
Because that lowered the embodied carbon of the building, which was one of the missives of the company. They wanted to build a super sustainable building, and that was how we solved the problem.
So, yeah, I'm not sure how involved you are with the designs. I mean, like you said, you're in 20 different countries. You're doing multiple projects, all sorts, in every category. How involved do you get in projects? Do you select the ones you want to be involved in, or can you even be involved in projects at this point?
Oh no, no. If I were not able to draw every day, I would go be an investment banker. But no. I still draw every single day, as do all my partners, and we deeply care about being connected to the design, being with we call them shoppers, our staff, and the shoppers are all together and we all pin up. It's just like school. For those of you who went to architecture school, it's just pin ups. No one cares who designed what. The stuff goes up on the wall. We all get around. We all debate. We all draw. We all sketch on everyone else's sketches, and best idea wins. I don't care if it was a partner's idea, or if it was someone who's been there for 15 years or someone who's been there for 15 weeks. If you have a good idea, it moves forward. And it's a very iterative process, and it's a very inclusive process, and it's a very open process. And we still try to have fun and laugh every day.
Walk us through the process. So I come to you and I say, I have a piece of land in so-and-so place. Walk us through the process. Do you start with the neighborhood first, with the client, what they want, with the function of the building? Like, what is the process that you go through initially?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's all that. It's a lot of research. Like, we don't put pen to paper or click to screen or whatever you want to call it, like, for a while. We actually do a tremendous, I think one of the most fun things about being an architect is I get to be everybody else, right? Like, I'm designing for the head of a tech company. I have to be the head of the tech company. I'm designing for a car manufacturer. I have to be a car manufacturer. I'm designing for a museum. I have to be a museum curator. And you have to play that role, and you have to get into the mind of the people that are going to be there. And I think a lot of it is interviewing everyone who's there, and interviewing and understanding what they want the building to do. I never, ever, ever ask, what do you want the building to look like? Ever. No, I actually don't. I don't. I want to know what they want it to do. How do you want it to perform? What effect do you want to have on your people, on the buyers, the tenants, the users, the students, whoever it might be? Tell me what we want it to feel like, what they want to do, how does it want to perform? And then we think about the context, we think about budget, we think about materiality, we think about history, we think about the narrative, and the narrative actually ends up being a really important part of it. Like, you have to write a story about the building, and you write that story so that when you come down to those darkest, hardest days where you don't know what decision to make in the 100,000 decisions you make to design a building, you go back to the story. And when you can rely on a great narrative, it helps you solve those problems. And so we get very, very involved in how do I talk about this building and what does it do? And, I always say there's never a ta-da moment at Shop. Like, we don't go away and then there's like a sheet over the model and we roll the model in front of the client that we the client knows, because they've been a partner in all of that all the way through, in dozens and dozens of meetings of talking about why and the narrative and how and what. And then we say, okay, here are the ways we can solve this. We can solve this problem like this. And usually they get really excited about it. I mean, sometimes they don't, but usually they do.
So, now you do projects and you have your name on these things and you get to pick and choose who you work with. And if you're far down the line in a project and, you sort of come to head with the developer and, they want the building to look pink or something that you wouldn't want to put your name to, but you're like, far into the project. How do you deal with those situations? Because I know people have opinion about design. Everybody thinks they have amazing sense and aesthetic right now.
So pink I'd probably be okay with, but yes. That's a really good question. So I like to say, look, buildings take like 5 to 10 years. Most of them like 10 years is probably the average for all these buildings. So I do like to say that the relationship is like a marriage. And you're going to go through good days and bad days, and days you're in love and days you're not so in love, and days that you battle and days that you like really solve things together in an incredible partnership. And when I look back on my career and I look at the buildings, I can tell which ones were the good marriages and which ones weren't. And you can see it very, very clearly. And so what I try to do at this point is really think about that partnership. Because, I think this way. I don't mean to sound dramatic or fatalistic, but like I've got X buildings left. And I don't want to waste my time on people that I'm going to not have a good relationship with. Right. So there have only been a few times where I've said, take my name off the building. Hasn't happened too often. So even if you got paid for it and you designed it, you didn't want to have your name. Absolutely. Right. There are buildings out there that shop has designed that nobody knows shop design.
Can you name one?
Absolutely not. But dead to me.
How is it different to sort of build in New York versus the rest of the other countries that you build in?
So an interesting thing, like we started as a New York firm, and the work was in New York, and then the work sort of went around the country, and then sort of in the last 10 years, it's gone around the world. And there are different challenges in every place. I am a New Yorker, and I care very deeply about this city, and I'm incredibly proud that much of our best work is here, and I'm incredibly proud that we've had a positive impact on the city. But building in New York is hard, and I kind of love that. And it's such a cliche, but like if you could do it here, it's actually you could do it anywhere. And to be honest, New York is one of the only cities that you can export architecture from. It's like there aren't a lot. And like I can go to Delhi or Bangkok or Sydney or Rome. No, not Rome. Milan. Yes. Rome. No. We're in Sweden, we're in Rotterdam, we're in London. As a New York architect, you can go there. It is very hard to do the opposite. So it's like if you get the shit kicked out of you in New York and you can pull off good buildings, they kind of figure you can handle it wherever you're going.
And there's a novelty to being a New York architect. I mean, people love to say, my architect's from New York, right?
Yeah, which is really, I don't get that, but yes, you're correct. It's like kind of a thing. Yeah. So I always think of the Seinfeld thing Wayne talks about his architect and what. The whole funny thing about all the Seinfeld episodes was he always made fun of architects, as you guys know. Do you guys know this? So he always says, George Costanza always wanted to pretend to be an architect. And the great scene is when George is trying to impress a girl from high school, and she says, well, what buildings have you, he says, I'm an architect. And she says, well, what buildings have you designed? And he says, the addition to the Guggenheim? And she goes, yes. She goes, yeah, I did that. and she goes, really? And he goes, yeah, it wasn't that hard. Now, why did Jerry Seinfeld write that into it? Because Charlie Gwathmey, who did the addition to the Guggenheim, was doing his house in the Hamptons at the time. And so it was a total inside joke for him to make fun of his architect. on Further Lane in East Hampton.
But when you look at a lot of your buildings, like the Steinway Tower, the Brooklyn Tower, the American Copper, and the other ones, they look expensive. They look like expensive buildings, not only to build but to live in. And I know you guys do affordable housing as well. How do you apply like high design, high aesthetics to affordable housing?
It's just problem solving. Like I do not look. We've been able, building 111 West 57th Street was an extraordinary moment. Which who knows if I'll ever get to build a building like that again. And there was really kind of no budget. Michael told me, I said, so like, what is the budget for the facade? And he said, there's no budget.
And the investors felt that too.
Absolutely, they did. And I said, great, I'll break it. But the issue was, and we didn't actually. We actually delivered that facade for $180 a square foot, which, considering it was made of custom terracotta and bronze on a 1,428 foot tall building, was remarkably actually affordable. But designing, it doesn't matter. It's problem solving. We give the same care to an affordable housing project that we do to an ultra luxury project. It's just how do you solve the problem? Do you solve it with certain kinds of materials? Do you solve it with space planning? Do you solve it with sustainability? Like, whatever it is, it's just a challenge, and it doesn't matter. Like, we're just solving a problem. And I'm incredibly proud that you can look at some of our affordable housing projects and nobody knows they're affordable housing projects. That means we won.
It excites you to have a client come and tell you there's no budget versus somebody
happened once.
versus somebody who's like, hey, I got to put Section 8 housing here. So I mean, does that challenge excite you, or?
Yeah. I mean, look, American Copper is an 80-20 building, right? It's got 20% affordable in that building. Like, to think we have 100% copper facade on two folding buildings with a glass bridge spanning between the two of them with that level of design in an 80-20 rental, like, that is incredibly exciting. We delivered, it was like $400 a foot. I mean, that was tough. The funniest part about American Copper, for those it was when the building was about 5 stories out of the ground, a neighbor called the fire department saying that the building was falling over. And I got like these emergency phone calls, and I had to race from the office downtown to the site. And there were like 50 firemen around the JDS guys. And I heard them say, no, the building's supposed to be that way. And the fireman goes, who the fuck designed the building that leans over? And I like stepped away very quietly from the back of the thing.
But that is a true story. So, even when you look around here, you see all these new buildings have gone up, and everything seems to be a square glass box. And you seem to avoid a square glass box. I mean, even if you have to put a bend into it, like you did with the American Copper. And the Brooklyn Tower, that's a chance to do a square glass box. You create an octagon. Like, you don't like squares.
Not particularly. Yeah, I mean, if it's the right answer to... If it's the right solution to a problem, we'll do a square. That's fine. But I think more, it goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning about texture and materiality and a narrative and history and connecting to it, right? Like, and it's not history in the sense of copying what was done in the past, because that's just nostalgia, and we all know what that is, and that's fine. Like, it's fine if that's what you feel like doing. Like, sometimes we like to go to an Italian red sauce joint with checkered tablecloths. Yeah. But like, nostalgia is fine. But what I'm super interested in is taking the DNA of a place or a city and the history of that city and repositioning it using technology into something completely new. Yeah. And when we can do that, I think you make something that's really original, but yet resonates and makes people connect to it. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we're doing? They're not monuments to us. They're gifts to the city. That's how we like to think of them. And if you can do that with the materialities and the texture and breaking, these buildings are big, and we're just humans, and we stand next to them. How do you make people feel? How do you relate to these buildings? And I just don't think a big taut glass skin always does that the best. They're beautiful, they're well done, they're nice to be in, but sometimes a little breakdown in that scale, I think, really makes us connect in a different way.
You mentioned that you did this for the same client, but you did the Steinway Tower, and then you did the Brooklyn Tower. And the Steinway Tower, you said, is the well-heeled uncle, and the Brooklyn Tower is like the dark, sinister uncle. And there's a lot of criticism towards it because they said it looks like I'm not familiar with Lord of the Rings because I'm an adult, but people compare it to the Lord of the Rings tower. That's the Tower of Sauron. And but you're actually very proud of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, so I'm not meaning to correct you. So what I did say was that Steinway was the well-heeled linen suit uncle on Uptown New York, and that Brooklyn Tower was his super cool niece who wears a lot of leather, lives in Brooklyn, and has a lot of piercings. And that was literally the narrative that we gave to, because we were designing them at the same time. And that was the narrative in the story. What would she want? What would this be? How is she the badass? What is she going to do? And like, how is this building going to occupy building? And we knew we had an incredible responsibility because it's the only site zoned in Brooklyn for a building that tall. So we knew it would be the tower. We knew it would be the marker. We knew it would be the way the Empire State Building sort of sat alone for decades as this one tall building in a fairly low-rise neighborhood. We knew we had that responsibility. And it shouldn't be like Manhattan, right? Brooklyn's cooler, and it's doing like more interesting stuff, and it has to look forward in a different way, but it also needed to connect to the past, and it needed to feel like a New York building. And, there's this, it's funny because there's this Gothicness to this and there's this Gothamness to it. And I don't know why those words, etymologically, why they're connected, but they're connected. And so the building is simultaneously Gothic and Gotham. And it should be tough. And the running bet in the office is when they're both in the movies, will the villain or the hero live in the penthouse of each one? And which one should it be? So, I love the fact that people like that it's controversial. Like, I love the fact that it's this big badass tower and that changes depending on how the light hits it. And sometimes that building looks gold. Sometimes it looks blue. Sometimes it looks black. Sometimes it looks all of the above. Sometimes it looks like the most sinister place, and sometimes it looks like a cathedral. And like, if you can pull that off, like, I feel very lucky I got a chance to do a building like that. And then the crazy thing, which you probably haven't seen yet, is the base of the building, which has these insane pilasters, which is how we got it through landmarks, was because there's a historic bank at the base.
Dime Savings Bank.
Savings Bank, which is one of the most beautiful buildings in New York City. If you've not been inside, you should go. Both an exterior and an interior landmark. And we developed these pilasters along the base of the building, around the part that we were finishing out the block so there's juniors on the corner, there's the bank on the other corner, and then we had sort of 2/3 of the rest of the block to fill out. And so the entire building had fluted columns all over it. And so we were like, well, what can you do with fluting, right? Like, here's this old thing, like whatever. But we liked the idea of the texture. And so we said, well, some are convex and some of the fluting is concave. So why don't we just take these pilasters and make them concave at the top and convex at the bottom? And we'll mill them using technology 5 stories tall out of solid Greek white marble, and create this series of pilasters of what we call the convexicave columns around the bottom of the building to make this completely modern connection to a historic building. So there's only 3 towers built on landmarks in New York. Hearst, done by Sir Norman Foster, which took 3 years to get approved. Steinway, on top of the Steinway building, 111 West 57th Street, on top of the Steinway building, which we got approved in 4 months. And the Brooklyn Tower, which is the second building with JDS and shop, which we got approved in 1 day.
Wow.
And it was because of the narrative of those columns and the way that we were making the connection to those buildings that it pushed the whole design forward.
And there's something interesting, obviously, about the Steinway Tower is that it is the most slender building in the world. And you talk about this, it's, and how they base it is the ratio of the ground floor compared to the height of the building. And for a really slender building, the ratio is 1:10. And the stuff that you see in Asia, it's 1:15, which is over the top, unbelievable. And the Steinway Tower is, what's the ratio?
1:24. So it was a radical departure from a structural perspective, and incredibly difficult. WSP were the engineers, and they did a fantastic job, but it was super tough. So I will say, so there's an 800-ton damper at the top of the building that helps stabilize the building from wind. So people talk about earthquakes, right? Seismic. Actually, wind is a bigger force than earthquakes, but you have to watch out for them. But going back to your glass thing, so the issue is that the wind comes across the building, and it wants to push the building back and forth. The building will not fall. In fact, a building that doesn't move, you should be very, very afraid of. Those will fall. But a building that moves back and forth is very safe. It just doesn't feel good. Right. So you've got to play the game between it being able to move and feeling safe, feeling okay inside, so you don't get seasick. So that's the game that you play when you do it. So the fascinating thing is that all these taut glass buildings actually perform exactly like an airplane wing, which is as the wind goes across that taut glass facade, it speeds up the wind and actually pushes the building further back and forth. And so while the terracotta on 111 West 57th Street started as a DNA nod to the history of the buildings, the towers of New York that New Yorkers love, the more textured we made it, it created wind turbulence as the wind went across the facade and actually slowed the building down from moving. So it was performative as well as decorative, which is super exciting.
I'm going to ask a few more questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience. But just on that point, it's actually safer to be in a tall building during an earthquake than one.
Absolutely. The place you should be most terrified is a 4-story brick townhouse in the West Village. Run in an earthquake. If you're in any skyscraper, you're totally fine. Don't worry about it.
Do you ever go back and see who's living in the buildings you built?
We recently were invited to dinner at someone's apartment in 57th Street. They threw a dinner party. We were fortunate enough to be invited. It was a very windy night. It was one of those nights with 60-mile-an-hour winds, and I was scared shitless that the building was going to move.
Like, Greg,
Greg, this is your fault. Yeah, I was totally like that. Unfortunately, everyone had enough to drink and didn't really notice. But the chandelier was moving about 1/4 of an inch, which was fine, and no one could feel it. But the fascinating part was, if you guys remember, I guess it was about a month ago, there was an earthquake in New York. And literally when the earthquake hit, I was in my office and in the Woolworth building, and I felt it shake. And all my clients who were not from New York was like, "Is that the subway?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's not the subway." And the first thing I thought of was like, "Oh my God, what's 57th Street doing?" Like, in a total panic. And then we asked that night, and the husband was they live on the 79th floor, and the wife was in the gym in the historic base in the historic Steinway building. And she felt the earthquake completely move back and forth, and he was up on the 79th floor working, and he said there was zero movement at all because the damper kept him still while the ground moved back and forth. And I never thought that would happen, and that's what happened, and I thought it was like one of the coolest things ever.
And there was some talk that the people who buy at the top of the building tend to be Asian and Middle Eastern, and the lower part of the floor it's New Yorkers, and the middle part is Midwesterners.
Yeah.
So is that true for all of the buildings, or?
Oh, no. Well, we probably should. Is this being filmed? She's like, yeah, no. So there were only, I think there were only 2 foreign buyers in 57th Street. Yeah, it's almost all Americans, and I'm not exactly sure, but whatever, it doesn't even matter. But there was a correlation that the New Yorkers were lower and the Midwesterns were in the middle, and the West Coast was higher. I said maybe they wanted an ocean view. I don't know, but and the New Yorkers wanted to know what the weather was by looking out the window, as we all do. So,
All right, I'm going to go to the audience. Yes, sir.
It was really bothering.
I'm sorry.
It bothering.
Yes.
Like, you can change it and like for North State, but that, if you talk about it, that things I have, that's out there on it.
Yep.
Not how you place.
Absolutely. We're already working on several conversions of historic buildings from making the transition from commercial to residential. And I think that's fantastic. I mean, again, like I said before, all the technology of sustainability is great, but reusing a building like that is the most sustainable thing you can actually do. And not only sustainable from a material standpoint or an environmental standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, and taking these buildings and repositioning them. And, that embodied carbon that's already there, like, let's reuse it into something great. And it's not really any different. I mean, I'm living with a facade, and that's fine. That's okay. And let's just make the space great, the light great, the circulation great, the lobby experience great. Fortunately, a lot of these buildings also have some additional FAR. We can do a Zelda and get some and build something on top, and using live load recovery. And, you could do a beautiful modernist addition on the top, and you can celebrate the historic building, and you make every single part inside that building feel like both, and make it a great space for people at any income level. It could be luxury or it could be affordable, and everyone deserves good design, and you can do it at every level, and that's what really matters. So we're thrilled about the prospect of conversions and the positive impact it's going to have to the city. It's got to, let's hope our government figures out a better way.
Is there any truth to the fact that the newer the commercial building is, the harder it is to convert it?
Yes, it is. Because, the very simplified way of talking about this is that a lot of the buildings that are, say, pre-World War II, didn't have air conditioning. So, and lighting was expensive. Electricity was expensive. So they had smaller floor plates with operable windows so that you could get natural light and you could get natural air into the building. And that was how they were designed. As we got air conditioning and post-World War II sort of ideas of sort of American corporate efficiency, that was when we switched from the 5,000 or 10,000 square foot floor plate to the 30,000 foot floor plate. So the 30,000 foot floor plate is really tough to convert into residential. It's actually almost impossible. But those old buildings are perfect for residential, because they were designed for light and air, which is what we all want in our homes.
I know we forget that HVAC is only 70 years old. Yeah, it's yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to talk about the, like a super tall towers.
Mm-hmm.
Since the first super tall, the beginning of the Billionaires Row 157, definitely the New York City skyline had changed a lot, right? Because of Steinway Towers and, things like that. And it kind of it slowed down a little bit after a bunch of the new super tall towers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this is temporary pause, or so do you imagine, you vision that 20, 30 years from now, 1,000 plus feet buildings, super tall buildings will be like Walmart building in New York City? Or
You're asking a great question. So the fact of the matter is there aren't that many places to do a super tall. The reason we have the super talls is because a lot of the FAR has been used up and there's no place to deploy it. And so somebody gets a very small site and they can get the extra FAR on the site, and the only way to use it is by going tall. So like the fact that there would be 1,000 super talls is not possible under the zoning. It just, that doesn't exist, right? The second thing I'll say is when you look back at what most people consider to be the most romantic moment of the Manhattan skyline, the moment that it like captured the world's imagination, let's say in the 20s and the 30s, if you look at the skyline then, the city was very low, and then there were these tall spires that went up in the air. And that was the romance of the skyline. And then the ensuing 50 years, it kind of all grew to this like 40 to 50-year-old giant block of a box of a skyline. There were a couple things. There was Chrysler, there was Empire State Building, there was Woolworth, there was 70 Pine, right? Like there were a few of them that GM, there were a few of them that popped up. But it was really funny. I don't know what we were watching the other day in the office, but it was a documentary about something, and we were looking at it. We're doing a building in Long Island City, and the client had gone out there in 2005 and was filming the skyline. And we looked at the skyline before all the super talls were there, and everyone was like, it's so boring. It was so homogenous, and it didn't have that romance. And when you read, and I'm a devout student of New York City history, and when you read prima facie documentation from the 1890s or the 1920s or the 1960s or even the 80s and now today, like people were horrified. It was the most disgusting thing that would ruin the city, was the building of 14-story co-op buildings on Fifth Avenue. How dare they replace single-family homes of robber barons with something as crass and high and miserable that will cast shadows on the park and ruin the experience for every New Yorker by putting a 14, 15, or 16-story building on Fifth Avenue. So, kind of fuck off. I don't know. Like this is New York. And when you freeze a city in ember, that's when your city is dead. Like, if the city isn't evolving, if the city isn't changing, if we aren't able to accept that it's going to move and shift and accept people from diverse backgrounds and diverse countries and diverse points of view, then we've got no hope. And so I feel that those super tall, like I hate Billionaires Row moniker, but the fact is the city is changing, and that's okay. Look at all the neighborhoods in Brooklyn that have completely transformed and how fantastic many of them are. Like, the city has to change, and we have to be okay with that.
Taking down single-family homes to put up like 740 Park, it actually created more housing. But
exactly.
But Steinway Tower, it's really housing only 60 people. So
but it's only 60 by 80 feet, so it's not very much. That's like basically like 3 townhouses, right? So it's you're right. It's only 60 units, and that's remarkable. But it was deployed over a historic building, and that's 60 more units than you would have had otherwise.
Yes, sir.
So you talked a lot about designing cars, community Stanford, Superdoor, and I imagine you did a lot of visual simulation of this movement. But I was curious, in your mock-ups, if you did anything physical where you felt, where your client, the developer, thought that's okay.
So the big thing about doing a super tall is that, and the reason we can do them is, one, increased strength in concrete, which has been around for a while, but has gotten better and cheaper. But really the reason we're able to do it now is that the digital simulations and the wind tunnel tests have gotten good enough that we can pretty fairly predict how they're going to perform. Like, you could have built a building like this 30 years ago, but you would be very scared about how it would perform because you couldn't tell. Now we can really tell, and that's why they're able to go up. And we've all learned from every building before us. We've all learned from 432 Park. We've all learned from 157. We're all learning, and it's going to keep going, and it's going to keep progressing. But you cannot simulate what it feels like to be in the building until it's built. Yeah. So that was why we were very interested to go to dinner on a night when it was 60-mile-an-hour winds.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Greg, yeah. You might one, what building would find it in a region or region?
Oh God. It's like talking about ex-girlfriends. Don't do that to me.
I took money, you know, anyway, like to most passionate one, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about ex-girlfriends, so that's okay. Look, to be really honest,
That's smart.
yeah, no, I won't do that either. They're all my friends. Like people say, I love all my children the same. You don't love all your buildings the same. It's just part of the process, and that's okay. Like if you're pushing yourself, and if you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort envelope, I'm sorry, your comfort envelope, like you don't know how it's going to turn out always. And sometimes it's magical, and sometimes you're thrilled, and sometimes you're a little bit less than thrilled. But every building I see problems in, and being a neurotic New Yorker, I'm like, I wish I could have fixed that. I wish I could have fixed that. I wish I could have fixed that. But you get over it, and people are happy, and you watch them talk about them. You watch them become part of the city, and they adopt, when Barclays got built, it was a spaceship, right? They called it the rusted George Foreman grill, right? Which I was like, cool, whatever, I'll make a hamburger. I did say to my client, I said to Bruce Ratner, we built that plaza in front, and I said to Bruce, Brooklyn doesn't have a town square. And I said, this is the town square. And I don't know how many of you know, but there was supposed to be an office building there, where there was supposed to be a giant office building right there. And we built the Oculus, and we built the cantilever, and there were 34 lawsuits against that project, and Bruce went 34-0 in the lawsuits and got it built. And I remember the last day, there were still the day that it was opening, there were still protesters there, and they were holding up a stop the project. And Jay-Z opened the arena with 8 days of concerts. I don't know if you guys remember it. We're there the opening night. And I was standing, they don't know who I am, so I'm standing next to the protesters, and they literally put down their signs and they're like, I guess it's over. And the one woman said to the other woman, so what are you doing tonight? And she said, oh, I've got tickets to the Jay-Z show. And then I said to Bruce, I said, I'm going to tell you, your problem is going to be that we built this great cantilever, we built this Oculus, we built this subway station, we made this part of the city. And when you want to build the office building there, they're going to protest to save this. What happened 8 years later? They talked about building it, and there were protesters out there to save the Oculus and to save the plaza. What happened 4 years later? Summer of 2020, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, became the center of protest for all of Brooklyn. So the city, in less than a decade, adopted it as its home. And it became an enabler for what's beautiful about urban life. And that's when you feel like you've done something that's great. And so those are the moments I'm most proud of. And I don't have a dream project. I feel like I've already gotten to build my dream projects. I just, in the last years, I just want to do good work. And most importantly, I just want to work with good people, because I just want it. If you're working with good people and you have that good marriage and you have that good relationship, you will make great work, and then it doesn't matter what it is.
That's very beautiful. One last thing. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I did some of the building. I was trying on the top part with this. So let's take out snippet. We also, especially in that left here, the blue rock for center. The left kick drop.
Yeah, that was the one that got away. So yeah, we designed a really spectacular library for the president. And one of the highlights of my career was spending time in the Oval Office talking about architecture with the guy that cared about it, really cared about it. And we came in second, which, in architecture, basically architecture and poker, the two worst places to come in is second. right? So like, so that was brutal. But I'm very proud of what we did, and I'm very proud that we got to spend time with the president and his wife, and to think about something like that. Michael Stern said, "Don't worry about it. Just take it and spray paint it gold, and you can sell it to Trump." So,
All right, last question. Go ahead.
that's a good one.
There's so many buildings that are beautiful on the outside, and then a lot of people never know what it's like on the inside. I just, from an artistic point and aesthetic point, be interested to get your thoughts on, like, do you have a preference of when you're conceptualizing, do you enjoy one or the other? Like, I just walk in the building sometimes, and it's a totally different experience when you looked at it downtown.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky to work with a partner who's a phenomenal interiors architect, and we get to do great buildings together. And the interior is absolutely as important as the exterior. Like, to me, they're equal. Again, I'm going back to Michael because we're in New York, and there was the moment where I said to him, 60 extraordinarily wealthy people are going to get to live in this building, but 8 million of us have to live with it every day. So you need to be as committed to the outside as you are to the inside. And Michael said, 100%, you're right. And that's how we got that building. And I think, like I said, buildings tell a story. Like, you see them on the skyline, you see them at the neighborhood scale, you see them at the building scale, you see them at the pedestrian scale, you see them down to the point where you touch a doorknob. And I think that the building has to ring true and be true to the narrative at every single level at all times. And it's not easy to do, but we really, really strive. And sometimes you don't even know. Sometimes you don't know anything about architecture or real estate or whatever. But I kind of love that when there's somebody who doesn't particularly know about it, and they like touch that door handle and they know something's different. They know there's a different light, there's a different quality, there's a different feeling. There's something that makes them excited. There's something that they want to pose their family or their friends in front of and take a picture. And there's something that they smile when they go inside. And bringing delight, which I think was Alberti's word, for one of the tenets of architecture, is really important. And that happens both in the inside and the outside, and we strive to do that every day.
This is something we do as tradition. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Here. Guys, I need some high energy from you guys. Gregg Pasquarelli. Great. One last thing. Give us a last message. Give us a last message. One last thing.
The last message is that our cities matter, and the quality of the buildings that we build and the quality of public space matters to every person every single day. And all of you who are interested in architecture, real estate, finance, building, construction, it makes a difference what we do. It makes an absolute difference what we do every single day. Don't stop.